My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 45 years old and I've spent the last 23 years building something that other people spent 2 months destroying. That's the mathematics of corporate betrayal. It's not an equation that appears in any of the business textbooks they gave me at university, but it's an equation I've learned to calculate with absolute precision. It's a Tuesday morning in late September when the invitation arrives. It's printed on heavy cardstock, black and gold, the colors of excess and pretense, the kind of invitation that announces itself the moment you hold it, that demands to be noticed. It's addressed to me at my office at Ironbridge Logistics, where I've worked my way up from entry-level warehouse coordinator to director of supply chain operations. Every single position I've held, I've earned. Every single title I've walked through the proper channels to receive. The invitation reads, Black and Gold Benefactors Masquerade, Mahogany Club, Saturday, October 5th, 8 in the evening, semi-formal attire, special recognition for our diamond tier patrons. At the bottom of the invitation there's a line of names. Diamond tier benefactors, Scott Whitman and Ava Sinclair. My ex-husband's name and his current girlfriend's name printed in gold foil lettering on black cardstock, announcing that they've achieved a status of prominence in a community that I never cared enough about to penetrate. The Mahogany Club is one of those places where old money goes to pretend it's not old, where power brokers go to make deals that shouldn't be made, where the truly wealthy go to convince themselves that they're also truly superior. I've never been a member. I never wanted to be a member. But Scott was always different. Scott always wanted to be the kind of man who belonged to clubs like the Mahogany Club. He wanted to be the kind of man who could say at dinner parties, "I was at the club last night," and have that sentence carry weight. That sentence meant something. That sentence meant he was important. Scott Whitman is 47 years old. He's my ex-husband, which makes him a person I used to know very well and now barely recognize. We were married for 18 years. We had 2 children together. He had a vice presidency at Ironbridge, which he obtained primarily through the relationship he had with me. When I was promoted to director of supply chain operations, Scott was promoted to vice president of public relations. It was understood, though never explicitly stated, that this was because I was ascending, and therefore he should ascend as well. This is how corporate nepotism works. It's not always about who's the most qualified. It's about who's married to the person who's actually doing the work. We divorced 6 years ago, not because we didn't love each other, but because we loved different versions of each other. Or perhaps more accurately, because he loved the version of me that would sacrifice everything for his advancement, and I eventually realized that that version was consuming all of the other versions and leaving nothing behind. The reason for the divorce was clinical. We grew apart. We had different priorities. We wanted different things. We amicably divided our assets. The children stayed with me during the week, and with him every other weekend. It was a textbook divorced couple scenario. Reasonable. Mature. Boring. What I didn't anticipate was that reasonableness and maturity would be used against me. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Scott met Ava Sinclair. She's 39 years old, a lawyer, and the kind of woman who understands that sometimes the most powerful position in a room is the one directly behind the most powerful man. She presented herself as supportive and interested in his career. She presented herself as someone who could help him achieve his potential. She presented herself as his partner. What Ava Sinclair is, actually, is a predator wearing a business suit and carrying a designer handbag. I learned this slowly, in fragments, over the course of approximately 2 years. First, there was a lawsuit. It was a shareholder dispute, the kind of thing that happens in any major corporation from time to time. The shareholders alleged that Ironbridge had been mismanaging certain aspects of our supply chain, that we'd been cutting corners on ethical standards to increase profit margins. This was partially true. Any large corporation has ethical compromises built into its operating model. That's just the nature of capitalism. You can't operate at scale without eventually deciding that certain people's well-being is less important than certain quarterly earnings reports. However, I had been working to address these issues. I had been implementing new protocols. I had been building systems that would make our ethical lapses smaller and more manageable. It was going to take time, but I was committed to moving the company in a better direction. Then, suddenly, I wasn't the person leading that charge anymore. Suddenly, I was the person being accused of orchestrating the ethical lapses. The lawsuit was strategic. It was designed to isolate me as the point of failure. All of my decisions were re-examined through the lens of potential malfeasance. All of my communications were scrutinized for evidence of intentional wrongdoing. And every single time I tried to present context or nuance, or the actual complexity of the situation, it was brushed aside as special pleading. Ava Sinclair was Scott's lawyer in the lawsuit. She represented his interests as a shareholder, which meant she represented interests that were ostensibly aligned with exposing the corruption in the company. But what she was actually doing was methodically dismantling my professional credibility and positioning Scott as the person who was concerned and ethical and trying to do the right thing. It was a beautiful operation. It was genuinely impressive in its execution. The lawsuit resulted in a judgment against Ironbridge. My supply chain was put under provisional receivership. Certain of my decisions were deemed questionable and were subject to external review. My authority was significantly diminished, and at the same time, Ava Sinclair's profile was elevated. She became known as the lawyer who'd taken on a major corporation and won. She became well-connected. She became influential. Most importantly, she became indispensable to Scott. The kids, Liam and Sophie, started spending more time with him because Ava was fun. She took them to restaurants and movies and concerts. She made it clear that she was not trying to replace me, just trying to be a positive presence in their lives. She was friendly and interested and always available. She was everything that I wasn't at that moment, because I was dealing with the professional crisis that she had orchestrated. I'm not going to pretend that I didn't make mistakes during this period. I did. I was distracted. I was stressed. I was angry. I said things that were sharper than they needed to be. I missed family dinners because I was in meetings trying to defend my professional reputation. I snapped at my children when they told me stories about their father's new girlfriend and the fun times they were having with her. I became, in short, the person that Ava Sinclair had designed me to be. I became the bitter ex-wife. I became the difficult mother. I became the person whose life was visibly falling apart. And Scott and Ava looked at that and they felt satisfied. They looked at the evidence of my deterioration and they called it justice. Now, 6 months ago, something changed. Something shifted in my understanding of what was actually happening. I don't know if it was a moment of clarity or just the simple passage of time allowing me to see things more objectively. But I realized that I had been operating from a position of guilt. I had been assuming that because I was failing in some aspects of my personal life, I must also be failing in aspects of my professional life. I had been accepting the narrative that Ava had constructed for me. So I started asking questions. I started looking at the evidence that had been presented against me in the lawsuit. I started examining the expert reports that had concluded I was managing things poorly, and I realized something fascinating. The expert reports were identical, not similar, not aligned in their conclusions, but literally identical. Entire paragraphs were word for word the same. This is not how expert reports are supposed to work. Expert reports are supposed to be original analysis conducted by independent experts. They're not supposed to be copy-paste jobs with different letterheads. I brought this to Noah Patel. Noah is my appellate attorney, a man in his mid-40s who made a career of reviewing corporate cases and finding the seams in supposedly airtight legal arguments. I showed him the expert reports. I showed him the identical paragraphs. I showed him the expert named in the reports was affiliated with a consulting firm that had received multiple payments from a firm that Ava Sinclair owns. Noah looked at me quietly for a very long time. Then he said, "Rachel, if this is what I think it is, we're not just looking at a reversible judgment. We're looking at ethical violations that could end her career." "I just want my company back," I said. "I just want to be able to do my job again." "I know," Noah said. "But sometimes, to get back to where you need to be, you have to go through places you don't want to go." I've been sitting on this information for 6 months. I've been gathering evidence. I've been documenting everything. I've been consulting with Maya Chen, who's a forensic financial analyst and who specializes in exactly the kind of corruption I'm investigating. Maya is the kind of person who can look at a set of financial records and tell you not just what happened, but what was intended to happen, and what someone tried to hide the record of. What Maya found was a systematic pattern of payments from an entity called the Evening Fund, which was ostensibly a charitable organization designed to support various cultural initiatives in the city. In reality, it was a slush fund. Money flowed into it from corporate accounts, and then it flowed back out in ways that were designed to obscure the connection between the money that went in and the money that came out. The Evening Fund had made a substantial payment to the consulting firm that employed the expert who'd written the identical reports against me. The Evening Fund's board of directors included Ava Sinclair. The Evening Fund's primary funder was a shell corporation that Scott Whitman had created. In other words, my ex-husband had funded the legal attack against me through a charitable organization that was run by his girlfriend. The legal attack was based on fraudulent expert reports, and the system had taken this fraudulent evidence and used it to diminish my authority and my reputation. It was corruption. It was sophisticated corruption, but corruption nonetheless. I've decided that I'm going to present this evidence at the Mahogany Club Gala. I'm going to stand in front of all of these people who care about prestige and reputation and belonging, and I'm going to show them exactly what's been built on fraud. I'm going to take their carefully constructed narrative and I'm going to shred it in front of everyone who matters to them. Some people would say that's revenge. Some people would say that's bitter and wrong and not the action of a mature person. Some people would say that I should just move forward and let karma handle it. I'm not one of those people. My grandfather, Walter Morgan, left me something when he died. He left me a trust fund. He also left me a letter, written in his own hand, that explained why he'd set up the trust the way he had. The letter said that true wealth is not measured in how much you accumulate, but in what you're willing to defend when defending it costs you something. Walter Morgan understood something about legacy. He understood that sometimes the most important thing you can do is show people what truth looks like when it's placed directly next to lies. So I'm going to the Mahogany Club Gala, and I'm going to show everyone exactly what their precious reputation is built on. The Mahogany Club occupies the top floor of a building downtown, the kind of building that was constructed in the early 1900s by men who believed that their money would outlast their consciences. The building has a certain grandeur. There are high ceilings and crown molding and fixtures that are made of actual brass instead of the brass-colored plastic that most businesses use. It's the kind of place that announces its own importance the moment you enter it. The gala is scheduled to begin at 8 o'clock in the evening. I arrive at 7:45, which gives me time to observe the scene before the crowd becomes too dense. I'm not dressed in the formal evening wear that the invitation suggested. I'm wearing a jacket that I wore on my first day working at the docks, years ago. It's gray and it's lined with steel, and it carries the smell of work and metal and honest labor. I'm also wearing a mask. It's not an elaborate mask or a decorative one. It's a simple construction mask, the kind that you wear when you're dealing with dust and particulates. The woman at the door of the gala, who's responsible for checking names and verifying invitations, does a double take when she sees me. "I have an invitation," I say, handing it to her. "It came directly from the club." She looks at the invitation. She looks at my jacket and my mask. She makes a phone call and speaks quietly into the receiver. A moment later, she steps aside and allows me to enter. Inside, the gala is exactly what I expected it to be. It's excessive. There are ice sculptures. There are waiters carrying trays of champagne and canapes. There are small string lights arranged in patterns that suggest elegance without actually being elegant. And there are people, dozens of them, all wearing formal attire and decorative masks, all pretending that they've gathered here for a charitable purpose instead of for the simple pleasure of being among other wealthy people. Scott is near the center of the room. He's wearing an Italian suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. He's wearing a gold mask that matches his belt buckle, which matches his cufflinks, which matches the gold in his watch. He looks like someone has taken the concept of excessive wealth and attempted to render it as a human being. Ava is standing next to him, her hand on his arm in a way that announces to everyone in the room that this is her man, that she's claimed him, that she's won. She's wearing a black mask with ostrich feathers, and her dress is designed to show off the parts of her body that are meant to suggest youth and attractiveness. She's beautiful in the way that women who've had access to unlimited money and the best cosmetic surgery and personal trainers are beautiful. But it's a constructed beauty, a beauty that announces itself as artifice. When Ava sees me, there's a moment where her expression shifts. She doesn't recognize me at first, because I'm so far outside the context in which she's learned to see me. And then recognition clicks into place, and she smiles. It's not a nice smile. "Well, look who decided to come slumming," she says, loud enough that people around us turn to look. "I wasn't aware that the invitation was extended to the help. Did you come to serve the drinks? Or are you just here to remind everyone of what you've become?" I don't respond immediately. I'm observing the room, observing the people, observing the way that wealth tends to cluster. I can see various people from Ironbridge Logistics. I can see board members and major shareholders and members of the corporate hierarchy. And I can see something else. I can see the way that people are watching Scott and Ava. I can see the way that people are paying attention to their proximity and their physical contact, and the way they're presenting themselves as a unit. "Not everyone comes to a masquerade to hide," I say finally. "Some people come to reveal." "How philosophical," Ava says. "Scott, shouldn't we offer your ex-wife a drink? I'm sure all of this grandeur is quite overwhelming for someone more accustomed to warehouse lighting." Scott looks at me for the first time. There's something in his expression that's difficult to identify. It might be recognition. It might be guilt. It might be nothing at all. Just the blankness of someone who's become very comfortable with pretense. "Rachel," he says, and he says it in a way that suggests he's not entirely sure we've met before. "You came. I'm glad. Are you?" I ask. "Or are you just glad that I'm here to observe your happiness?" "That's not what this is," he says. But he doesn't elaborate on what it actually is. A waiter passes with a tray of champagne. I take a glass and I hold it without drinking from it. I'm observing the room, and I'm thinking about the evidence that I have. I'm thinking about the forensic accounting that Maya has done. I'm thinking about the expert reports that are identical when they should be unique. I'm thinking about the shell corporations and the slush funds and all of the infrastructure that was built to destroy my professional credibility. Most of all, I'm thinking about the fact that none of these people know any of this is about to be exposed. There's a moment, earlier in the week, when I received a voicemail from my son. Liam is 17. He's at the age where he's starting to understand that the world is more complicated than it appeared to be when he was younger, but he's not yet wise enough to know what to do with that understanding. The voicemail said, "Dad, it's Liam. I don't know if you're going to call me back, but I needed to say this anyway. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I believed what everyone was telling me about Mom. I'm sorry that I chose to spend time with you and Ava instead of with her. I think I understand now that I think I understand that sometimes the person who seems like they're failing is actually the person who's telling the truth, and the person who seems like they're succeeding is actually the person who's lying. I don't know how to fix it, but I wanted you to know that I see it now." Scott listened to that voicemail and he did nothing with it. He didn't call his son back. He didn't acknowledge the apology. He didn't seem to recognize that his son was trying to repair a relationship that he'd deliberately damaged. Instead, he went back to being in love with Ava, and he went back to ignoring the parts of his life that didn't fit into the narrative that she'd constructed. The gala continues. There are speeches about charity and community and the importance of supporting local cultural institutions. The Evening Fund receives an award for its philanthropic work. Ava stands and accepts the award on behalf of the board. She talks about how important it is to give back to the community, how important it is to support the arts, how important it is to maintain the standards of excellence that the city is known for. She says all of this while standing on top of a foundation of fraudulent expert reports and corrupt financial transactions. She says all of this while looking directly at me. And then, at 9:30, I excuse myself, and I go to a secure room that I've arranged access to beforehand. My attorney, Noah, is waiting for me in that room. So is Maya Chen. So is Evelyn Hart. Evelyn Hart is 61 years old. She's the president of Iron County Bank. She's also one of the trustees of my grandfather's estate. More importantly, she's someone who knew my grandfather very well. She knew him before he became a wealthy man, and she knew him as he was becoming wealthy. She understood what he valued and what he was trying to build. Evelyn is holding a leather-bound passbook. It's very old. It dates back to 1978. My grandfather opened this account in 1978, and he set it up with specific restrictions. The money was placed into a DRIP account, which means that dividends were automatically reinvested instead of paid out. The account was in Midwestern Utilities stock. The account was structured so that it couldn't be transferred or alienated or claimed as part of my grandfather's marital estate. 47 years of dividend reinvestment. 47 years of compounding returns. 47 years of my grandfather betting that by the time I turned 45, I'd understand enough about the world to know what to do with it. The current value of that account is $11.3 million. My grandfather left this to me specifically because he believed in something. He believed in the idea that true wealth is not just money, but the ability to act with integrity when acting with integrity costs you something. He believed that by the time I was 45, I would either have become the kind of person who would use that wealth to do the right thing, or I would have become the kind of person who'd use it to do the wrong thing, and he wanted to make sure that I had the resources to do the right thing if I chose to. I'm choosing to do the right thing. Are you prepared? Noah asks me. Once we do this, there's no going back. I've been prepared for 6 months, I say. I've been gathering evidence and documenting everything. I've been waiting for the right moment. This is the right moment, Evelyn says. This is the moment when their entire world is built on the lie. This is the moment when your grandfather would want you to strike. I nod. I pull out my phone and I send a text message to Maya, who's still monitoring the main ballroom. The text says, "Begin transmission." What happens next is very quiet and very technical, which means it's probably the least dramatic part of this entire operation. Maya activates a video feed that plays on the screens in the ballroom. The screens were originally set up to display a slideshow of photographs from previous galas, artistic images of the city, and the club, and the people who belong to it. But what appears on those screens now is something very different. What appears is the forensic accounting, the bank records, the shell corporations, The payments from the evening fund to the consulting firm, the identical expert reports with identical paragraphs, the timeline showing how these documents were created and how they were used in the lawsuit against me. And then, underneath all of that documentation, Maya plays an audio file. It's a conversation between Ava Sinclair and the expert who wrote the reports. The conversation was recorded at a lunch meeting approximately 2 years ago. In the conversation, Ava is explicitly directing the expert to write reports that would present my supply chain decisions in the most negative possible light. She's discussing payment amounts. She's discussing the fact that the expert reports would be used in a lawsuit that would be designed to isolate me as the person responsible for all of Ironbridge's ethical lapses. The conversation is approximately 8 minutes long. By the time it finishes, the room is completely silent. People are standing. People are staring at the screens. People are looking at Scott and Ava, trying to understand what they're seeing and whether what they're seeing is actually real or whether it's some kind of elaborate hoax. Scott's face has gone completely white. Ava's hand, which was previously on his arm, has fallen away. And the two of them are standing in the middle of a room full of people, surrounded by evidence of their own corruption, and the masks that everyone was wearing are no longer sufficient to hide what's actually underneath. "What you've seen on these screens," Noah's voice says, and his voice is being projected through the ballroom's sound system, is evidence of systematic fraud in the lawsuit that was filed against Rachel Morgan. This evidence has been submitted to the state's Bar Association and to the local district attorney. Ava Sinclair is facing charges of ethics violations and potential criminal fraud. The expert reports that were used in that lawsuit are being officially rescinded. The ballroom descends into chaos. People are talking loudly to each other. Some people are trying to leave. Some people are making phone calls. Some people are staring at the screens like they can't quite believe what they've seen. I walk back into the ballroom. I'm still wearing my construction mask and my gray jacket. I'm still wearing the clothes of someone who's not supposed to be here, who doesn't belong, who is visibly different from everyone else in the room. I walk directly towards Scott and Ava. "This is fraud," Scott says, and his voice is shaking. "This is a setup. This is you trying to destroy us because you're bitter about the divorce." "It's not a setup," I say quietly. "It's documentation. It's evidence. It's everything that was actually happening underneath your pretense." "You can't prove any of this," Ava says, but her voice has lost its confidence. She sounds small and desperate and very aware that her world is collapsing. "I can prove all of it," I say. "I have Maya Chen's forensic accounting. I have the audio recordings. I have the documentation of payments from the evening fund. I have everything, and it's all been submitted to the appropriate authorities." "Why are you doing this?" Scott asks. "Why are you destroying everything?" "I'm not destroying everything," I say. "I'm revealing everything. There's a difference. Everything that was built on honesty remains standing. Everything that was built on fraud is collapsing. That's not me destroying things. That's consequences." The evening continues, but it's no longer a gala. It's a crime scene. People are leaving. The police are being called. Ava is being detained for questioning. Scott is making phone calls to lawyers, but the lawyers he's calling are explaining to him that they can't represent him if they're also representing Ava, because his interests and her interests are now in direct conflict. By the end of the night, the Mahogany Club has suspended its recognition of Scott and Ava as benefactors. The club has announced that it will be conducting a full audit of all the money that the Evening Fund has directed to the club over the past several years. The club has issued a statement saying that it does not support fraud and that it will be working with the authorities to ensure that all crimes are fully investigated. I leave the gala at approximately 11 o'clock in the evening. I drive to the docks, to the place where I worked when I was very young, before I moved into management, before I became responsible for managing other people's work. The docks are quiet at night. The water moves slowly, and the lights from the city reflect on the surface of the water, and everything is very still and very dark. I stand there for a very long time. I'm not thinking about anything in particular. I'm just existing in this place that means something to me. This place where I learned what hard work actually looks like. This place where I learned that the most important thing you can do is show up and do the work, and not pretend that you're doing anything more significant than that. Tomorrow, the newspapers will be full of stories about the fraud, about the expert reports, about the lawsuit that shouldn't have succeeded. Tomorrow, there will be articles about how Ava Sinclair is facing disbarment. Tomorrow, there will be photographs of Scott looking diminished and confused and very aware that his world has collapsed. But tonight, I'm just standing on the docks in the dark, and I'm thinking about my grandfather and about legacy and about what it means to do the right thing when doing the right thing costs you something. The events of that evening spread through the city with remarkable speed. By the next morning, every major news outlet is running the story. The headline in the local paper reads, "Major fraud exposed at Mahogany Club Gala. Prominent lawyer faces disbarment." The headline in the business section reads, "Supply chain director vindicated as corruption uncovered." By midday, the district attorney has issued a formal statement. Ava Sinclair is being charged with fraud, conspiracy, and professional misconduct. Scott Whitman is being investigated for potential involvement in funding the fraudulent expert reports. The Mahogany Club is cooperating fully with investigators and has frozen all accounts belonging to the Evening Fund pending the outcome of the investigation. The impact ripples outward in ways that nobody anticipated. The consulting firm that employed the expert who wrote the fraudulent reports is losing clients. Law firms that have worked with Ava Sinclair are reviewing their relationships with her and making decisions about whether they want to continue those relationships. Board members of various charitable organizations that have received funding from the Evening Fund are asking difficult questions about where that money came from and whether it was ever actually the organization's money to spend. What I didn't anticipate, and what I'm not entirely prepared to handle, is the media attention directed at me. By late afternoon on the day after the gala, reporters are camping outside my office. They want to know how I discovered the fraud. They want to know whether I planned this elaborate exposé for revenge. They want to know whether I consulted with law enforcement before executing my plan. They want to know about my personal relationship with my ex-husband and whether our divorce was amicable or whether it was acrimonious, because that would presumably affect the credibility of my claims about fraud. I don't speak to any of them. I let Noah handle the media inquiries. I let the legal system handle its own processes. I go back to work because I have a job that I love, and I have responsibilities that I take seriously, and I don't have time to perform my own vindication for the benefit of people who are more interested in the story than the truth. But the vindication is happening anyway, and I'm beginning to understand the difference between being right and being believed. 3 days after the gala, the appellate court announces that it's reviewing my case. Specifically, it's reviewing the judgment that was rendered against me based on the fraudulent expert reports. The judge assigned to the case is a woman named Patricia Ellery, and Judge Ellery is known for being thorough and methodical and completely unwilling to tolerate malfeasance in her courtroom. The hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks after the gala. In those 2 weeks, the evidence accumulates. The forensic accounting becomes more detailed. The timeline becomes clearer. The audio recordings are authenticated. The shell corporations are traced back to Scott and forward to Ava. The entire infrastructure of fraud is exposed in its entirety. And slowly, one by one, people start to understand what actually happened. They start to understand that I didn't fail at my job. They start to understand that I was attacked by people who had a vested interest in presenting my failure as real. They start to understand that the narrative they'd accepted was based on lies. The hardest part of this process is not the legal work. The legal work is straightforward. It's the emotional work of watching my own family deal with the reality of what's happened. Liam comes to me 3 days before the hearing. He's 17, and he's looking at me with an expression that suggests he's trying to figure out who I actually am now that he's learned who I'm not. I want to help, he says. I want to testify. I want to tell the court that I know what happened. I know that Ava was trying to manipulate me. I know that she was using me to get closer to Dad, and she was using her relationship with Dad to try to make you look bad. I want to say that. I think about this for a very long time. I think about whether it's fair to ask my son to testify about his father's girlfriend. I think about whether it's appropriate to involve him in this process. And then I think about the fact that he's already involved in this process, that he's already been used as a pawn, that the question is not whether he's involved, but whether he's involved in a way that gives him agency or whether he's involved as a victim. Okay, I say, but I want you to understand something. When you get on that stand, you're not testifying for me. You're testifying for the truth. That's a different thing. The truth doesn't belong to either of us. It exists independent of what either of us wants. I understand, he says. Sophie, my daughter, she's 14, which makes her even younger and even more aware of the fact that she's been lied to by adults who should have been trustworthy. She doesn't want to testify. She's not old enough yet to have developed the kind of emotional armor that would allow her to stand up in front of a courtroom and discuss the ways in which she was manipulated. But she writes a letter. She writes about the things that Ava said to her, the ways that she was positioned as an ally against me, the things that she was told about my emotional instability and my bitterness, and my inability to be happy for her father. Reading that letter is one of the most difficult things I've done since this entire process began. Not because of what it says about Ava, but because of what it reveals about what my children were being told about me. Not because of the accusations, but because of the fact that these accusations clearly took root, that my children were doubting me, that I was allowing myself to be positioned as the bad actor in the story. The hearing happens on a cold morning in November. The courthouse is in downtown, a few blocks from where the Mahogany Club is located. The weather is clear and cold and the kind of day where you can see a very long distance. Judge Ellery presides over the hearing. She's a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and an expression that suggests she's seen enough of human nature to be permanently unimpressed by pretense. The courtroom is not full, but it's full enough. There are journalists, there are lawyers, there are board members from Ironbridge who came to support me, though they wouldn't admit that's why they're here. Noah presents the evidence in methodical detail. He walks through the forensic accounting. He presents the timeline. He plays the audio recordings. He shows the identical expert reports side by side and points out the exact paragraphs that are word for word identical. He shows the shell corporations and the payments and the trail of money that leads from Scott to the evening fund, to the consulting firm, to the expert who wrote the reports. When Ava's lawyer tries to object, Judge Ellery listens politely and then overrules every single objection. Then Liam testifies. He talks about the way that Ava positioned herself as his friend and his ally. He talks about the things she said about me when she thought he was listening. He talks about the way that he gradually came to doubt me, and the way that he's now learned that he was being manipulated. He does this calmly and clearly and with a precision that suggests he's thought very carefully about what he wants to say. When he finishes, Scott looks like he's been physically struck. His son has just testified against him, not out of malice, but out of a commitment to truth. The letter from Sophie is read into the record by the court clerk. The contents of the letter are similar to what Liam testified to, but they're written in the personal language of a 14-year-old girl trying to understand her own emotions and her own complicity in her own betrayal. After the legal testimony is finished, Judge Ellery takes a recess. She returns 1 hour later with a written opinion. Based on the evidence presented, Judge Ellery states, I find that the original judgment against Rachel Morgan was rendered on the basis of fraudulent expert reports. I find that Ava Sinclair deliberately created false documentation to support a fraudulent lawsuit. I find that Scott Whitman knowingly funded this fraudulent lawsuit through shell corporations and slush funds. Therefore, I am vacating the original judgment and ordering a full investigation by the State Bar Association and the district attorney. Judge Ellery then says something that I don't expect. I also want to say for the record that Rachel Morgan has conducted herself throughout this process with integrity and professionalism. She has chosen to expose corruption at great personal cost. She has prioritized truth over comfort, and she has done so in a way that honors both her own dignity and the dignity of this court. That is increasingly rare, and it deserves to be recognized. After the hearing, as we're leaving the courtroom, Noah puts his hand on my shoulder. You did it, he says. You actually did it. The system did it, I say. I just provided the evidence. No, Noah says. You did the hard part. You gathered the evidence. You were willing to be wrong about people you'd invested in. You were willing to see your ex-husband clearly. You were willing to accept that your children had been lied to. That's the hard part. That's the thing most people can't actually do. That evening, I drive out to the docks again. The sun is setting and the light is turning orange and purple and the kind of colors that make you think about endings and transformations and the way that things change over time. I'm standing at the edge of the dock, looking out at the water, when my phone rings. It's Evelyn Hart. Rachel, she says, I want you to know that the trust has been formally activated. Your grandfather's will is being executed exactly as written. The account with the $11.3 million is now yours, with the understanding that it comes with a responsibility. Your grandfather believed that money should not just be accumulated but used with intention. I understand, I say. There's something else, Evelyn says. Your grandfather left a letter. He gave it to me specifically to give to you at this moment. It says, Rachel, if you're reading this letter, it means that you've chosen to do the difficult thing. It means that you've chosen truth over comfort. It means that you've chosen to be poor in lies rather than rich in fraud. I'm giving you this money not to reward you, but to provide you with the resources to do what comes next. True wealth is not measured in what you accumulate, but in what you're willing to sacrifice for the people you love. Use this wisely. After I hang up with Evelyn, I sit with this for a very long time. I sit with the fact that my grandfather anticipated this moment. He anticipated that I might need resources to fight for truth. He anticipated that I might need to do something difficult, and that I might need the financial independence to do it without worrying about the cost. He anticipated that I would eventually need to choose between comfort and integrity, and he decided, in advance, to help me choose integrity. Winter arrives early that year. By mid-November, there's already snow on the ground, and the city looks different in the cold. Things are clearer when it's cold. Pretense doesn't work as well when everything is frozen and still. The criminal investigation moves forward with remarkable speed. Ava Sinclair is formally charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, and professional misconduct. Her law license is suspended pending the outcome of her trial. She's also being investigated for other potential frauds, other lawsuits, where she may have used similar tactics to the ones she used against me. What emerges from that investigation is something that's simultaneously unsurprising and deeply troubling. Ava has used variations of this strategy repeatedly. She has filed fraudulent lawsuits against corporate executives. She has created fake expert reports. She has used shell corporations to fund her schemes. She has systematically targeted people who were in positions of power and who had the resources to make her schemes worth executing. What makes me different from her other victims is that I actually discovered what she was doing. Most of her victims simply accepted the judgment and moved on with their lives. I'm the one who decided to look more carefully at the evidence. The trial is scheduled for January. By that point, it becomes clear that Ava doesn't have much of a defense. The evidence is overwhelming. The audio recordings are authenticated. The forensic accounting is irrefutable. The only question is how severe her punishment will be. Scott's involvement is more complicated. He funded the scheme, but he didn't directly orchestrate the fraud. His claim is that Ava approached him and told him that she could help restore his professional reputation by exposing corruption at Ironbridge. He was willing to participate because he wanted to help her, and because he was interested in the idea that his company could be improved by removing the people who were making poor decisions. In other words, his defense is that he was naive and foolish and willing to participate in fraud because he was in love with someone who manipulated him. It's not a great defense, but it's not nothing. The district attorney's office eventually offers him a deal. If he testifies against Ava, if he provides complete documentation of all the money he provided, if he assists in the investigation, then they'll recommend a reduced sentence. He takes the deal. He cooperates fully with the investigation. He testifies at trial that Ava approached him with the scheme and that he funded it without asking too many questions about the details. At the trial, when he's being cross-examined about his decision to participate in the fraud, the prosecutor asks him a simple question. Mr. Whitman, did it ever occur to you that if Ms. Sinclair was willing to commit fraud against Rachel Morgan, she might someday be willing to commit fraud against you? Scott doesn't answer immediately. He's looking at his lawyer, trying to figure out what the correct answer is. But there is no correct answer. Either he admits that he didn't consider the possibility, which makes him foolish, or he admits that he did consider it and participated anyway, which makes him corrupt. I trusted her, he says finally. You trusted her enough to fund criminal activity, the prosecutor says. But you didn't trust her enough to be honest with her about your concerns. Is that accurate? Scott doesn't respond. The trial lasts 3 weeks. By the end of it, the jury reaches a guilty verdict on all counts for Ava Sinclair. The sentencing is scheduled for February. The judge imposes a sentence of 4 years in a federal prison. Ava is remanded into custody immediately. Scott receives a suspended sentence and probation, with the understanding that he'll cooperate with ongoing investigations and that his law license will be under review. The Mahogany Club releases a statement saying that it has investigated the evening fund and determined that it received approximately $2.3 million in fraudulent funds. The club announces that it will be returning this money to legitimate charities and implementing new oversight procedures for fund management. Scott is forced to resign from his position at Ironbridge. The board of directors votes unanimously to accept his resignation. In the meeting where this happens, none of the board members need to discuss the reasons for his resignation. Everyone already knows what happened. What's interesting is the conversation I have with the board after Scott's resignation is accepted. Rachel, the CEO of Ironbridge says to me, we want to apologize. We allowed ourselves to be influenced by the fraudulent evidence. We made decisions based on false information. We doubted you when we should have believed you. You made decisions based on the information that you had, I say. You couldn't have known it was fraudulent at the time. But we should have been more careful, the CEO says. We should have asked more questions. We should have been more skeptical. We should have trusted you more because you've given us no reason not to trust you. The board votes unanimously to reinstate my authority and to officially apologize for any delays or complications that resulted from the fraudulent judgment. They also vote to increase my salary by 30% and to give me a bonus equal to 1 year's salary as compensation for the time I spent dealing with the fallout from the fraud. I don't need the money. I have $11.3 million in the trust account. But what I need is for people to understand that I was right, that I was trustworthy, that I didn't deserve what happened to me. The money is a representation of that understanding. The money is people saying, in the language that they know how to speak, that they're sorry and that they understand. The conversation I don't have is with my children. Liam and Sophie are aware that their father has been investigated, and that his girlfriend has been convicted, and that his career has essentially ended. But we don't talk about it. We just exist in a kind of careful normalcy where everyone is pretending that everything is fine, while simultaneously acknowledging that everything has fundamentally changed. One evening, about a week after Ava's sentencing, Liam comes to me and he says, "I don't know how to feel about Dad anymore. I don't know if I should forgive him or if I should be angry at him, or if I should just pretend that this didn't happen." "You don't have to figure it out right now," I say. Feelings about complicated situations don't have to be neat and simple. You can be angry at him and still love him. You can understand why he did what he did and still believe that what he did was wrong. "That seems exhausting," Liam says. "It is," I say. "Welcome to being an adult." Sophie, for her part, has taken what happened, and she's processing it in her own way. She started volunteering at a community center, teaching younger kids about financial literacy and the importance of understanding contracts and how money actually works. She's explaining to them the very things that Ava tried to obscure, the very things that Ava relied on people not understanding. I want to make sure people understand that money can be used to manipulate and that that's something everyone should be aware of. Sophie tells me when I ask her why she's doing this. I'm proud of both of them, though I don't tell them that very often. They're learning that the world is more complicated than they thought. They're learning that people you trust can betray you. They're learning that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. These are harsh lessons, but they're important lessons, and I'm grateful that they're learning them now, when they still have time to integrate them into their understanding of. Spring arrives slowly that year. By March, there's new growth on the trees, and the weather is beginning to suggest that winter might eventually end. The docks begin to come alive again. The water traffic increases. The smell of salt and metal and diesel fuel returns to the place where I spent my earliest years working. I've made a decision, and I've been sitting with it for several months, turning it over in my mind, examining it from different angles, making sure that it's the right decision before I commit to it. I'm going to leave Ironbridge. Not because I'm forced to leave, but because I want to leave. I want to build something new. Something that reflects my values and my understanding of what a company can be when it's not constrained by the need to appear prestigious or impressive or worthy of belonging to the Mahogany Club. I'm using the trust fund that my grandfather left me to establish something called the Walter Morgan Center. The center will be located in the warehouse district, in the place where I started my career, in a building that used to be used for storing supplies and shipping goods. We're going to renovate it and turn it into a training center for logistics and supply chain professionals, but with a specific focus on ethical business practices and corporate responsibility. We're going to teach people how to do things correctly, not just how to do things quickly. We're going to teach them how to recognize fraud and corruption. We're going to teach them how to resist pressure to compromise their integrity. We're going to teach them that the most important thing about building a career is building it on a foundation of honesty and accountability. The announcement that I'm leaving Ironbridge creates a small stir in the business community. There are articles speculating about whether my departure is related to the scandal, or whether I'm moving on to something new. The articles eventually settle on the truth, which is that I'm moving on to something new, something that I believe in more than I believed in the position I was holding. When I announce the Walter Morgan Center, several people reach out to me offering support. Evelyn Hart, the president of Iron County Bank, offers to handle all of the financial architecture of the center, making sure that the money is invested properly and that there's a sustainable funding model. Noah Patel offers to handle all of the legal work. Maya Chen offers to serve on the board and to help develop the curriculum around financial forensics and fraud detection. Even Miguel Torres, who was the warehouse manager at Ironbridge and who provided critical evidence during the investigation, reaches out to me. He wants to help develop the training programs. He wants to teach people the skills that he's learned over decades of working in logistics. He wants to be part of building something that reflects his values. 6 months after I announce the center, we hold an opening ceremony. It's held at the dock, in the evening, with the sun setting over the water. We've cleaned up the old warehouse and turned it into a training facility. There are classrooms and office spaces and a library full of books about business ethics and corporate responsibility. Liam and Sophie come to the opening ceremony. Liam has actually spent some of his summer helping us renovate the space. Sophie has been developing some of the curriculum. They're proud of what we're building, not because their mother is building it, but because they understand that what we're building is important. At the ceremony, as the sun is setting, I stand on the dock and I look out at the water, and I think about my grandfather and about the letter he left me and about the choice I've made to do the difficult thing instead of the easy thing. I think about Ava Sinclair, who's currently serving her sentence in a federal prison in the Midwest. I think about Scott, who's trying to rebuild his career and his relationship with his children under the weight of the consequences of his choices. I think about all the people who were affected by their actions and who are now rebuilding their own lives based on new understanding of what they can trust and what they should be skeptical of. I think about the idea that my grandfather understood something fundamental about human nature, something that the self-help books and the corporate training seminars don't ever quite get right. He understood that true wealth is not measured in dollars or in prestige, or in belonging to the right clubs. True wealth is measured in the freedom to act with integrity, and the resources to sustain that integrity when acting with integrity costs you something. That's what the trust fund represents. That's what the Walter Morgan Center represents. That's what all of this has been about. I hold a pin in my hand. It's a gold pin, shaped like the Mahogany Club symbol. It was given to me by Evelyn Hart, who explained that it was taken from Ava Sinclair's belongings and entered into evidence during the trial. Evelyn asked if I wanted it, and I said yes, because I wanted to remember what I was fighting against. I look at the pin and I think about what it represents. It represents the idea that value is determined by external markers of prestige. It represents the idea that belonging to the right club, wearing the right clothes, being seen with the right people is the most important thing. It represents the idea that you can buy your way into legitimacy. And then I hold it out over the water and I let it drop. It falls through the air and it disappears into the darkness of the water with barely a sound. "Why did you do that?" Sophie asks. "Because," I say, "some things have value only as reminders, and sometimes the best reminder is to watch something disappear." Later, after the ceremony is finished and most of the people have left, Liam and I stand together on the dock. The moon is rising over the water, and the light is the kind of light that shows everything exactly as it is, without shadows to hide in. "I'm proud of you," Liam says. "I know I didn't say it very often, but I want to say it now." "Thank you," I say. "I'm proud of you too. For testifying, for being willing to see the truth even when the truth was uncomfortable, for choosing integrity over loyalty to your father." "It wasn't really a choice," Liam says. "It was just seeing what was actually happening and deciding not to pretend anymore." We stand in silence for a moment. The water is moving, the way water always moves, reflecting the light of the moon and the lights from the city. Everything is very clear and very still. "Do you think Dad will ever be okay?" Liam asks. "I don't know," I say. "I think he'll have to decide for himself what okay means and whether he's willing to do the work to get there. But I think he has a chance. I think everyone has a chance to change, as long as they're willing to look honestly at themselves and make different choices going forward." "Do you think he will?" "I think that's up to him," I say. All I can do is focus on the choices I'm making and the life I'm building. The night deepens. The moon rises higher. The water continues to move, and the light continues to show everything exactly as it is. No pretense, no masks, no masquerade. Just the simple, clear reality of what is. I'm not angry anymore. I was angry for a very long time, but the anger has transformed into something else. It's transformed into clarity. It's transformed into purpose. It's transformed into an understanding of what I value and how I want to live. This is what my grandfather understood. This is what he was trying to teach me through the trust fund and the letter and the careful orchestration of his will. He understood that the most important thing is not to accumulate wealth or prestige or belonging. The most important thing is to develop the clarity to see what's actually happening and the courage to act based on that clarity, even when acting costs you something. And now I'm passing that understanding on to my children. I'm showing them that integrity matters. I'm showing them that truth matters. I'm showing them that the most valuable thing you can build in your life is not a career or a reputation or a bank account. The most valuable thing you can build is a sense of your own worth that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. That's what the Walter Morgan Center will teach. That's what I want every person who comes through that center to understand. You are more valuable than your ability to produce profit. Your integrity is more important than your prestige. Your peace of mind is worth more than belonging to the right club. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is to stand on the dock in the moonlight and let something go. Let the pretense go. Let the need to be impressive go. Let the desire to belong to the club go. Let it fall into the water and disappear, and then look at what remains. Look at what's actually real. Look at what's actually yours. That's what remains for me. That's what I'm building on. That's what will endure long after the Mahogany Club has changed its name, or closed its doors, or become irrelevant in the way that all institutions eventually become irrelevant. The moonlight is very clear tonight. There are no shadows to hide in. There's no pretense that can withstand this kind of illumination. And that's exactly as it should be.